discussed the origin of SAARC. We discussed, sorry, the origin of European Union in the last lecture. And I hope most of you do remember what were the factors, what was the situation, how uh, the World War brought different countries in the Europe together, and then the beginning of the Cold War made the countries on the western side of the Europe to create a bloc against Soviet Union, because most of the Eastern European countries had puppet governments formed by the Soviet Union. So all these negative factors, as per appearance, World War, American hegemony, despite all these negative factors, a positive thing developed, which was integration in the European countries. Eventually, the European situation was different when European Union was created. However, it was a very successful experiment, and it made all other regions in the world go for some sort of regionalization. So in 1967, a few years after the creation of after the establishment of European Union or European Community, uh, ASEAN was formed. And then, since we are close to this region, that Southeast Asia, so in our region, this was people, the statesmen and the politicians started discussing that we need to have a regional organization for South Asia as well, or at least for Asia. And this was the preliminary idea, the main idea that was voiced as early as 1947. So even before the creation of Pakistan, there was a conference called the Asian Relation Conference that was held in 1947, a few months before the creation of Pakistan and India. And in that conference, the Nehru presented this idea of bringing in this region, Asia, together. In this conference, they actually invited almost every leader in Asia. Although India hasn't been declared independent by that time, but India and Congress arranged that conference, organized that conference, and everyone, China, Taiwan, and different countries, almost every country was fighting for independence at that time because colonization was ending. And so most of the leadership was the local leadership, but they were still under some sort of colonial setup. But they joined, and then they had a discussion. They jointly declared the colonialism to be a negative thing, that because of which they had suffered. And they jointly thought about having a more integrated Asia once this dominance of Europe, because colonization was the dominance of Europe, once this dominance of Europe ends, they realized that they need to come together. So to avoid any further dominance by Europe. Then, a few years after, the Colombo conference was held in Colombo, and in that conference, for the first time, Pakistan and India got a chance to meet each other, the leadership, because of the independence and all the Hindu-Muslim riots that followed it, and all the issues the two countries faced, the diplomatic issues. It needed to be resolved. So finally, in the Colombo, they had a conference, and in that conference, Pakistan and India both were present, and a few other South Asian countries. And it was thought that they might go for a sort of regional organization or some sort of regionalization. However, the Kashmir issue was the main bone of contention, and So the Colombo conference was held. Pakistan and India sat together. They talked about regional integration and everything. But since because of the you know this Kashmir issue, and Nehru was very sensitive about Kashmir because it was his homeland, and Liaquat Ali Khan presented, talked about Kashmir a few times, and Nehru was tried and ignored that thing. And so there was a discussion, but it couldn't proceed further. However, then in Bandung conference that held after 1 year, in which almost every newly independent African and Asian countries came together, they sat together. Again, this idea of regional integration was presented, and again, it was thought that it is important to have some sort of a regional or a supranational setup to, to strengthen unity among the Asian countries and African countries, because almost all countries were newly independent country. They were all they just came out of the colonial period. So this continued for the early 50s, and throughout the 1950s they continued discussing about this idea. However, no concrete plan came up, and the plan came up in 1977. And in 1977, the president of Bangladesh, he was the one who came up with a proper proposal to have a regional organization, just like ASEAN. So he was inspired with ASEAN, and he wanted to have a regional organization similar to that in South Asia. he he was, he became president of Bangladesh in 1977. And as soon as he was a president, he started pushing for, emphasizing on this idea of having a regional organization. And you need to understand why he was doing that. 1975 में Mujibur-Rahman, the guy who created Bangladesh, the Bangladesh military had a coup, and they assassinated him. So after that, and after 1975, from 1975 till 1977, uh, Bangladesh had a very tumultuous period, because constantly there were one coup and then other, then another. So military leadership tried and disciplinized the military, but it was getting difficult. So whenever there was a government, there was another military coup, and it so Zia-ur-Rehman, when he came in power, eventually he was declared a chief of army staff after the assassination of Mujib. And later on, when he looked at the chaotic situation in Bangladesh, he eventually declared himself as the president. But at that time, he was a chief military administrator, and then later on, he became the president of Bangladesh. So it was a military regime in Bangladesh at that time. And obviously, like any other military regime, he was, he wanted to legitimize his military government. He wanted to ensure that everyone in South Asia accept his military government. And since there was a chaotic situation within Bangladesh, so external support, when you're weak inside, you try and have external support. So this was the situation in Bangladesh, and this was the reason he was pushing to have some external support. So some support from India, some support from from Pakistan and other South Asian countries. So he could, present himself to his people that he has been accepted as the legitimate uh, president of Bangladesh, and they need to accept him as well. So this was the situation. what was happening in Pakistan? Can anyone recall what was happening in Pakistan?
Hmm.
1977 में हमारे यहाँ इलेक्शन हुआ था और पहली दफ़ा 19 क्योंकि 1973 का कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन आ गया था तो पहली दफ़ा 1973 के कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन आने के बाद एक प्रॉपर डेमोक्रेटिक सेटअप बनने की कोशिश हो रही थी और इलेक्शन हुए और इलेक्शन के रिजल्ट आपको पता है उसमें पीपल्स पार्टी जीत गई थी लेकिन उसके बाद रिगिंग के इशू उठाया गया जो अपोजिशन का पार्टीज थी कि बहुत सीरियस लेवल पे रिगिंग हुई है उसकी वजह से प्रोटेस्ट स्टार्ट हो गए थ्रू आउट द कंट्री और इनिशियली वोटर वाज वेरी reluctant in negotiating the matter. However, जब वो चीज़ें बिल्कुल सिचुएशन आउट ऑफ कंट्रोल होने लगी तो he realized that he needs to sit at the table अगर उस वक्त opposition जो थी उसने बहुत ज़्यादा रिजिडिटी दिखाई और जब ये सिचुएशन बिल्कुल ही आउट ऑफ कंट्रोल हो गई तो देन इस सिचुएशन में फिर मिलिट्री को हो गया और जनज़िया जो है वो पावर में आ गए सो पाकिस्तान में भी वही केओटिक सिचुएशन थी जो कि यानी पाकिस्तान का जो फर्स्ट एक्सपेरिमेंट था डेमोक्रेसी के साथ हमने नया नया एक्सपेरिमेंट किया था वो फेल हो गया था और एक मिलिट्री डिक्टेटर वाज रूलिंग इन पाकिस्तान एज वेल सो बांग्लादेश for Zia-ur-Rehman, it was, he could relate to the situation in Pakistan. So and throughout till 1977 Congress Indian National Congress was the main political party that was ruling in India. However, there were several corruption charges against them and in 1975 Indira Gandhi was convicted of electoral fraud by the Allahabad High Court and that was a tumultuous year in India as well. And in 1977, people started revolting against the government. So we often use a term called Janta Wave. So Janta Wave started in 1977. An emergency had to be implemented, and finally. Indira Gandhi dissolved the assembly and re-elections were held. And when elections were held, for the very first time, a non-Congress person was elected as the Prime Minister of India. And that non-Congress person is one you're seeing here. So many of you might not remember him, although he was someone that needs to be um, you know needs to be remembered in South Asia. So Murray was a very pro-peace person. And during when he came to power at that time, since Bangladesh had recently been created and Bangladesh relationship with India were not good because of Indian efforts to intervene in their internal matters. Pakistan's relationship with India were not good because the way India was involved in 1971 events and India relationship with China were not good at that time as well. So Murarji Desai, when he came in power, he was a very open person, and he said that India cannot behave like that this in the region, and it needs to improve its relationship with the neighbors. So he improved his relationship with the Ziaul Haq, with Zia-ur-Rehman, and with China as well. So he was a pro peace person, and I don't know how many of you are aware of it. Ziaul Haq had a very good relationship with Ziaur Rahman. I mean, as good as two statesmen from India and Pakistan could have. And he even awarded him the Nishan-e Pakistan award, although before he could present it to the Sai, he got killed. And when Benazir came in power in 1990, she was the one to present it. However, Ziaul Haq was the one to announce it. Ziaul Haq announced that Zia-ur-Rehman, this eye will be presented with Nishane-Pakistan. Nishane-Pakistan is the most, the highest civilian award in Pakistan. The relationship between India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh were improving, and it was it was a friendly environment. It was a good environment to start a regional organization. Then a few incidents, a few events happened in the world, external world, outside South Asia, which pushed South Asia toward regional integration. First, in 1979, early 1979, Iranian Revolution happened, and then afterwards, the after effect of that Iranian Revolution was the second oil crisis. Since the oil supply from Iran got reduced because of that. The price of oil started peaking, and the Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh economy got affected. So economically, we had a difficult time at that time. And then Jimmy Carter and James Calvin, they both visited Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan, and during their visit, they came up with certain offers. The world was pushing South Asia towards integration. Things were changing in around. And yes, I forgot to add that point. By the end of the 1979, Soviet invasion in Afghanistan was another event that pushed South Asia towards integration, because political situation around us was changing. The external political hegemon, the two superpowers were trying to have their influence in the region, and the region needed to be together more than ever. So, keeping all these factors in mind, Zia-ur-Rehman visited India as soon as he was in power, and he visited India. He discussed this idea of having a regional organization, and then in 1978, the King of Nepal he visited Bangladesh, and again a discussion came at and they discussed this organization. King of Nepal was very forthcoming. He was very welcoming to the idea. Then the Zia-ur-Rehman continued discussing this idea with other South Asian statesmen. He did that in 1979, the Commonwealth Conference, and the Non-Aligned Summit that happened again in 1979. Then, by the end of 1979, in November, he visited Sri Lanka, and this was an important visit because during that visit, things started shaping, and then almost all countries in South Asia, except Pakistan and India, appear to be agreeing to, they wanted to have a regional organization. The problem with India was that India was reluctant because they thought that maybe this regional organization would bring all South Asian countries together, and they might start challenging India, so they might gang up against India. In Pakistan, since imagine India being the largest country in South Asia, being the strongest economy in South Asia, strongest military in South Asia. They have the highest number of the weapons, in terms of weapons, in terms of conventional weapons, in terms of everything. I mean, it's a hegemon in South Asia. It's a strong country. So Pakistan had this fear that since whenever there will be an regional organization, India would dominate that organization. And they both presented their fears to Zia-ur-Rehman during the discussions period. Then both had issues with the security integration, because initially the plan was to have economic integration, political integration, security integration, every type of integration. And this is similar to what happened in Europe as well, because if you remember, the initial plan to have a political community in Europe failed. So similarly, India and Pakistan, because I mean, you can the main enemy for Pakistan was India, and if you have a security alliance with India, I mean, against whom? So Pakistan for Pakistan, the main security need was against India. So there was reluctance from our side, and India similarly had reluctance to have a security alliance with Pakistan. And so finally, in 1980, during the UN General Assembly session, all leadership met and they decided that they discussed the plan, and then a formal draft paper was present. By the end of this discussion, a formal draft paper came out from Bangladesh side, and in that formal draft, they decided that the integration would not be political and security. So they made sure that Pakistan and India's affair have been taken care of. Then from 1981 till 1983, we had several meetings at the foreign secretary level, during which we discussed the draft paper, which was created by Bangladesh. And unfortunately, by that time, Zia-ur-Rehman had been assassinated as well. However, the plan continued. His dream, whatever he planned to have, he had sown the seed. So the statesmen that followed him continued pushing for that. And in 1983, then there is a ministerial level meeting. 85, finally, they had we decided to have we all were happy with the draft. There was no political clause. There was no clause to have a political alliance. Any political matter could not be discussed. It was a purely economic and cultural alliance. And then SAARC summit was held in Dhaka, and every South Asian countries attended that. और फिर charter sign कर लिया हमने.